one year for our Latin services at our church in Wisconsin, we did plays.
Plays are great.
Mm-hmm. So I guess you could say we did plays in church.
I like that. This word, come on. Oh, come on. Okay. I guess it's alive. We've gotten to verse 27, and I'm just going to repeat this. I won't go through the Greek again, but this is very straightforward translation from the Greek. And this is Martha. Martha, Lazarus has died. Jesus is making the trek. He's coming to visit. And then we got Martha and Mary. Martha comes running out, walking down the thing, comes in line with Jesus, and she makes a statement that he corrected. And then she makes this statement, and I told you, this is a telos. This is a direct telos, and probably the telos of John. It's almost in the center of the book. But what's really wild is that, this, well, we're going to see even more evidence that this fits into the man born blind argument, or the man born blind logos, logical argument. But she makes this statement. She makes a logical argument to him. Yes, and it's a word that I only think this word occurs a couple of times. You should check it in the New Testament. But it's nigh. The normal word in Greek for yes, what is the normal word for Greek for yes? I can't remember. Anyway, usually we get the normal word for yes in Greek. This yes is nai, which is a strong affirmation. It's a very different kind of word. We don't, I guess in English, do we have an equivalent in English?
Put it in bold.
Yeah, put it in bold.
Indeed. Capital letters.
Yeah. Right, whatever.
Exclamation.
Exclamation point. Yeah, so they didn't have any punctuation. We're kind of hurting for that, right? But it's nice, a strong affirmation, supreme in authority. I have been persuaded. I have been persuaded because you are the Christ, the offspring of the God, into be that which was created, into the world is coming. And what is also interesting about this is, remember, we're watching The Chosen, which I think is really cool. And Jesus, they use all the stuff from the New Testament. But, John's message is the kingdom of heaven is coming, right? And then Jesus' message is the kingdom of heaven is here, right? Here. She says is coming, which is, she still gets a little bit wrong, but that's okay. That's okay. Notice Jesus corrected her, but it's here. And the words that are used in Greek are really interesting because it means the kingdom of heaven is right next to you. It's next, it's beside you. I thought it was really interesting. In Nicene Creed, it says God had created everything visible and invisible, right? And I want to promote the invisible because the Greeks all knew about the invisible, like math and cool stuff like that, and reasoning and logic and thoughts. But you see that is coming. In other words, the kingdom of heaven is right here. You might not see it, but it's here. And again, I got some notes there. It says maybe the strongest and most correct statements we ever get from anyone in all the Gospels or the New Testament. It's akin and as powerful as those spoken by Paul, because Paul gives us some telos cases or other witnesses. And you look at the absolute, yes, the absolute truth of this statement. I put it in bold. Yes, I have been persuaded you are the Christ, offspring of God, who is coming into the created universe. Everyone should memorize this and know that Martha said it, right? I can't get over, probably my most favorite person is the Samaritan woman. She's probably the smartest person in the gospel, period, in all the gospels. And then we get the man born blind. Okay, I'm equal opportunity. Here you got a guy who's saying some really smart stuff, right? And basically confounding the Sanhedrin and confounding the Pharisees to the point that they start saying, they start doing invective against him, right? And saying bad things because, he's wiped out their arguments. And here we have Martha, the sister of Lazarus. And yet she makes a statement that I said, this is a stated telos. Now, what's really interesting is this isn't the telos of the logos that we're defining, right? We went from the logos, I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning, but the main logos that we've been touching is the man born blind, right? That was the that's the primary plot, logos, the primary point of the last 3 chapters approximately, and then this chapter. But the logos that this chapter brings in, the new logos, is what? What's the new logos?
Kingdom is here.
Well, Lazarus, right? Lazarus is dying, and then he's dead, and Jesus is kind of meandering his way up to Bethany, and this Lazarus guy, and we looked at it. Is he the same Lazarus guy? We're gonna hit this too when we'll discuss it when we get there. You got Mary Magdalene, and you got Mary, the sister of Lazarus, who we're gonna see a little more of. You got a lot of Marys, and you also have the woman who was the prostitute or whatever that anointed Jesus. Is that the same as Mary? History doesn't tell us. I thought it was really cool in The Chosen. They got Veronica, the woman who was bleeding for 12 years, which is the Matthew. When we went through Matthew, we had that, and the little girl that was brought back from death. And if you remember in Matthew, that was a continuing logos of the fact that Jesus healed a woman who was not able to bear children and apparently not married, and also a girl who was part of puberty, showing the value of women, at least in the logos, right? What a powerful statement that is. He wasn't healing men; he brought a little girl back from death, right? I thought it was cool. In The Chosen, he didn't say Tabitha come; he said "Little Lamb arise," which was not even a direct translation of Tabitha come, but whatever. I thought it was really cute how they did that. They got a Lutheran guy maybe writing some of their stuff, Little Lamb. Anyway, and look what goes on here. This is really interesting. This is 28 NIV. After she had said this, okay, so Jesus is coming along. She comes back. After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, it's asking for you. Okay, it doesn't tell us that Jesus was asking for Mary. Doesn't need to, right? They're saving ink. They're saving paper. That's one of the things about the. All right, I'm not going to mess it up for you, but The Chosen, there's paper's ubiquitous. Paper was not ubiquitous. Writing was not ubiquitous, and they did not do it at all like that. And also candles. Although we looked it up, candles were supposedly invented by the Romans and Greeks, like before 3000 BC. How many pictures of candles you see in any ancient stuff? How many candles you find? Zero. Right? They shouldn't be having so many candles, but they got old lamps and candles. Okay, that's cool. I'm going for it, but and of course, I think they started laying on their sides in the latest ones, but they've been sitting in chairs a lot. Like, oops, yeah, oops. It's really funny to think that they would lay down, but they probably give a chair to a slave would probably be sitting, right? But they're more likely to give a slave a chair than for them to, God forbid, not lay on your side at dinner. Oh, interesting, right? And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, "The master is come and calleth for you." Uh-oh. Look. I'm breaking it. All right. This is what's interesting in this. We didn't find this in NIV. And she, having said, she went off, and she emitted a sound to Mary, the female sibling of the same womb, of her, secretly, having said, the didaskalos, an instructor, the instructor, he is near, and phony, he emits a sound to you. And here's the translation of this. And she, having said this, she went off and she secretly emitted a sound to Mary, her female sibling in the same womb, having said, the instructor, he is near, and he emits a sound for you. What is really interesting about this is, there's a couple of really interesting abnormalities in this text. Not abnormalities in a negative sense, but culturally. Number one, okay, Martha went out to see Jesus. Who'd she have with her?
No one.
Well, it doesn't say, but she probably did. Because women did not roam out alone, unless they had a slave or a man, less likely another woman, although, that's common Victorian kind of thing, chaperonage. But, she probably had somebody with her. Now, the fact that she, remember in the house, Mary was in the house, and the Judeans were there in the house with Mary and were saying sweet nothings to her. Remember? Paramithus to her. Now, she would not, if you're in the house, okay, the women would be separated from the men. They wouldn't be in the same room, the same place, by something. Like she would probably be in a gynoecium or separated by a curtain or in some way, not in the same place. You just didn't do that. And so what this indicates is that Martha did not go in through the main house. She went in through the gynoecium, basically went in, maybe the back door, maybe had another way in, and spoke to Mary where the other Judeans couldn't see her secretly. So what we're getting here are little tidbits of the culture, right? Now, why doesn't the author have to tell us all this?
Well, people knew that.
Yeah, you knew it. Yeah.
Well, in verse 31, it says, when the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out. So wasn't she with them where they could see her get up and go out?
Wait and see. What it says, she came in and secretly talked to Mary. But then if she left again, well, let's look at because we're almost there, right? As soon as she heard that, she rose quickly and came to him, to that one thing, but which how she heard, she woke up. This is interesting too. It says, Igirathe. She woke up without necessarily the delay and was coming or going forward to him. So, again, maybe she was isolated, guys see him, and she was taking a nap while these guys are talking. They wouldn't know, right? And she has no reason to talk back to him. It's interesting the words that are used. But to that one thing which how she heard, she woke up without necessary delay and was coming forward to him, to Jesus. Very interesting. And now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. Now Jesus was not yet come into the town, was in that place where Martha met him. Pretty straightforward, right? Opio, not yet, but he had come or gone to Jesus into the hamlet, country town. Other things, contrariwise, he was even now into the spot where she went opposite under, met and fell in with him, Martha. So Martha went back ahead. Jesus stayed where he was. Here's the translation, but not yet Jesus had come into the hamlet. Contrariwise, he was even now to the spot, whatever where Martha went opposite under, met him face to face. Then 31. Okay, here we go. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. So you notice there's no talk about Martha here. Here's old Mary. And let's see, the King James will give us a little bit here. Here's the Greek. The Jews which were then with her in the house and comforted her when they saw Mary, that she rose up hastily and went out, followed her, saying, she goeth into the grave to weep there. We got Judeans, they were in company with her to the Oikia, the dwelling, and here's that word again, paramethopami. They were telling everything that cannot exist in reality to her. Having stared at Mary, that every cause, without necessary delay, she stood up, and she came or went in the same way with to her. They having formed an opinion, Luxantes, that or because she leads under into the sepulchral monument, in order that she might weep aloud in that place. Apparently, she was pretty quiet. I'll explain this. Accordingly, the Judeans belonging to Judea, they were in company with her in the dwelling, and they near telling her everything that kind of exists in reality, sweet nothings. They having stared at Mary, because without unnecessary delay, she stood up and I remember to turn on the. Yep. The sound, it would be soundless, and people would irritate me. And the same way, having formed an opinion, a personal judgment, that she leads under withdraws to the sepulchral monument, or that she might weep aloud in that place. Now, Anne said, well, she was with them. No, not necessarily.
Because they saw her.
Yeah,
so with doesn't just mean in the same house. It meant in a place where they could see her.
Maybe not. I'm going to propose to you that she was either in the gynoeceum or separated by some way from them. That's what they did in these houses. Martha comes in the back way, talks to Mary, tells her what's going on. What does Mary do? Mary stands up, walks out of the gynoeceum. They see her, and then she continues on. Now, it doesn't say if Martha stays in the house or not. The reason the author doesn't give us any more direct information, he didn't need to. Yeah.
How could they be talking to her though? How could they be telling her these paramethopami if she's not even in the same room with them?
Like I said, what they had is a curtain, or they would have you could have the door open with a curtain. Like for example, remember early churches? The earliest of churches in the Greek world had a curtain that they placed between the men and the women, so that the men couldn't see the women and the women couldn't see the men, but the preacher stayed on one side and the other. And in churches in America, some of the churches originally had curtains between one side and the other. The women were on one side and the men on the other side. Later, they got rid of the curtain, and so you just have the men and women on separate sides. And then, the famous whatever, eventually, even the Lutherans started sitting together as families, which is kind of interesting. But it is classical. Remember, Greek men and women were not together. And likewise, in the ancient world, in the Jewish communities, the men and women were not supposed to be together. So, like I said, I propose, it depends on how wealthy they are. If they're really wealthy, they would have a gynoeceum, it would have a locking door, and probably with a curtain. You could open the door, or they would have a guard. They would have a unit guard or guards over the women. In a household that's less wealthy, middle class, they might have a curtain between the different areas, and this is the women's area and this is the men's area. So what I think you can see in this picture, yeah, they're separated from Mary, and it gives us the impression that she's sleeping. You see that? She woke up, right? So, she was not, surrounded by men that would have been considered really improper, who were telling her these things about her brother, but rather she's in some place. Martha sneaks in, talks to her, and in secret, and then she gets up and she walks out the front door. So I think that's the picture we see, unless you can see another picture from this, but that's the one I see that this is giving us. And like I said, why didn't the author tell us all this? We're supposed to know. Don't you guys have a curtain between the ladies' part and the men's part in your house? Oh, You would if you were a Greek or Hebrew in those days, right? It says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. All right. A little different than old Martha, right? Mary was come where Jesus was. She saw him and fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Certainly accordingly, Mary, which how she came or went, whatever where he was, Jesus, she having stared at him, she fell down of him forward to his feet. She making a logical argument to him, Kyrie, supreme in authority, if you had been Hode in the same spot, no or not, wish supposition of me, he has died off the male sibling of the same womb. I also want to point out that it doesn't say about Martha. Where could Martha be right now? There's a couple of places she could be. I'll give you where I think she might be. Your sister's going out the front door to go back to see Jesus. Where are you going?
With her?
Yeah. The author doesn't need to tell us this. I think the author just presumes that in the culture, right, that the ladies are going together. I think it was uncultural. Now, we don't know who was with Martha. You know, maybe they had a slave, a male slave or slaves in their household. I told you before, this is a very wealthy household. You know, I think that Lazarus was the rabbi of Bethany. And that's, you know, that was why Jesus was hanging with him, and that's why they're there. But the fact that he has a house with two sisters in it is a pretty big deal. And the fact that there were a whole bunch of Judeans, right? Most likely, where did they come from? Not from Bethany, although there are probably some from Bethany. It's really close to Jerusalem and really close to Jericho. So if he was the rabbi of Bethany, who's there?
Fellow rabbis?
Yeah, all them rabbis, right? And old Jesus is a rabbi. I really think I think we kind of ipso facto proved that he was probably the rabbi of Capernaum. And here's Jesus, another rabbi coming. So, you know, I think this is all very normative in their society and culture. Everything's, you know, would fit into the cultural basket, right? The few things that the author tells us, however, are different than Roman and Greek, right? They're a little different than Roman and Greek because, you know, we're going to get into more of this, but, you know, for example, the Greeks are expecting a monument, a stone, a sepulchral monument, you know, and that's more like a gravestone. But we know it's going to be a tomb, right? We're going to find out more as we get there. Anyway, accordingly, Mary, which how in that manner came, whatever where Jesus was, she having stared at him, she fell down forward to his feet. She making a large harm at him, supreme in authority. If you'd been in this same spot, my male sibling of the same womb would not have died off. So Martha was not accusative. Old Mary, she was right to the point. You know, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews, okay, did they tell us that she was weeping? This is a great literary technique to tell you what the person is doing, right? But it's not a literary technique. It's to save paper. He didn't need to tell you she's weeping, but Jesus does, right? Or the author does. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And this begins a very interesting translational issue. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in spirit and was troubled. This translation is a bit wrong. Let's look and see what it says. Jesus certainly accordingly, which how he stared at her, caused sin. She weeping aloud, and they having departed together to her, Judeans, weeping aloud. He snorted like an angry horse. interpensatum. He snorted like an angry horse to the pneumati, to the conscious breath. And he tracks it. He put in motion himself. He was agitated. Okay, here's the translation. Certainly, which on what manner Jesus scattered her weeping aloud, and the Judeans, having departed together with her, they weeping aloud, he snorted like an angry horse to the conscious breath, and put in motion to agitate back and forth himself. Okay. This is, our translators did not do us any favors, did they? He was, agitated to his spirit. I told you before, remember, we had the sarx. Jesus is the bread. My body is the bread. My sarx is the bread, right? And then we had Nicodemus with pneuma. That was originally there. But we had the sarx, the whole thing about the sarx, and the Simeon of feeding the 5,000 in the bread, right? And then we had this whole section in the man born blind about the suke. I am going to lay down my suke. What the translators did, they said he's laid down his life. All right, whatever. It doesn't say that. It says suke. It says it's going to, his thoughts, his mind, right? So you got the body, I am the bread. He's giving his body, and then you got his thoughts. And now you have Jesus agitated to his core being of his pneumati, to the conscious breath. So the author, not just the author, the whole point of this is to now what? Bring into the point of the dialogue, the narrative, this idea of the pneumata, of the conscious breath. And it's really cool. I mean, this snorting like a horse, right? That's, we can never, I can't imagine Jesus snorting like a horse. I'd love to see it because you can imagine this, right? To his conscious breath. In other words, the conscious breath is the breath that you intentionally do, take in. Just like the unconscious breath is the breath that you do unconsciously. But Jesus snorted like a horse, like a wild horse. And it was to his conscious breath, all the way to the pneumati. Like I said, the translators do not do us any, I think they do us a lot of harm because we're now immediately, the whole picture has moved from something that is alive in the gay, in the world, right? To what? To something that is really supernatural and spiritual. In other words, this is a predecessor to a great event, and that's what the author is trying to tell you. And there's the final part here. It says he began to agitate in motion. It tracks him. Let me see. I've got notes on all this stuff. Let's see if I got this. It tracks him. I think I've got it in here. Tarusio, to put into motion, back and forth, to shake. So in other words, and okay, we get a little bit excited about this. Why is this normative to the Hebrews and the Greeks? What did they expect their prophets to do? Well, basically, you could tell a prophet because they were naked and then they were prophesying. And how did they prophesy? By, this agitated thing. Now, Jesus is naked, but the whole point is that this is a indication of prophetic action, that he is, agitated, right, to the point of physical movement, of shuddering, shaking. The Greeks and the Romans, they would totally be into this because what did the Delphitic oracle do before she gave her oracle? Shaked. She shook. It tracks him. The same word is used to describe that kind of action. And it's not a show. It's the choice of the words is exact. It's to indicate to you as a Greek or Roman or even a Hebrew that what's Jesus doing? What is he in? Prophetic stupor, prophetic action, prophetic he is in touch with God. That's probably the easiest, the best way to say it. These are physical indications that God, Jesus and God are one, at one. So in the previous ones, it was Jesus himself who said over and over again, I'm God, I'm God, I'm God. This is a physical action that would prove to the Greeks and the Romans and the Hebrews that God is in him. Remember what happened? Okay, I already said it. But what happened when God took over Saul and Saul was prophesying? Remember way back in the Old Testament? Saul took off his clothes and sat with the prophets and shook. You know, in the Greek, still would say attracts, and I bet Septuagint says attracts. I didn't look it up. But he was shaking and prophesying because that's the indicator. That's the indicator in these cultures. And I'm sure he was doing it. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Pretty straightforward. King James says, they said, where they laid him? They said, Lord, come and see. And Eben, he said, at what legality you have placed in a passive horizontal posture him. They make a logical argument to him, supreme in authority, you come or go, and you look. Judea. They said, and he said, at what legality have you placed him in a passive horizontal posture? They made a logical argument to him, supreme in authority, you come and you look. Again, I don't think the word usage is that odd within the context of the culture or the point, right? And also, we got to show these the Greeks and Romans that are listening to this, right? The differences, because the Greeks would have expected them to bury him, right? I don't know what the Romans would do. I guess Romans buried him too. I didn't look up Roman burial stuff. The Hebrews, though, they put him in a tomb, right, and let the bones rot, and then they put the bones in a little casket. Anyway, all right. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Oh, and I want to say this too. You notice the visiting Judeans? He said where they laid him, and there, what does it say? To him. They made a large argument. Supreme in authority, you come and you look. These are the Judeans talking to him, right? Notice that the visiting Judeans all acknowledge Jesus as Kyrie, supreme in authority. All right, we read that and just, what did our translation say? It said, they said to him, Lord, come and see. We translate it as Lord. Okay, that's cool. If we were living in Victorian or medieval England, we might get it. We don't have lords and ladies, right? We don't get it. But when you see that they said to him, Kyrie, supreme in authority, that means already Jesus is the equivalent to them of supreme in authority. Again, it's like reading between the lines, right? But yet, this is, the word usage and choices by the author are exact, and they're precisely telling us what's going on here. So again, they didn't call him rabbi. If they called him rabbi, what would it be? It would be peer. Yeah, peer, equal, right? I expect these guys are other rabbis. And what did they call him? Kyrie, supreme in authority. He's coming to, what's that?
So did they recognize that he was God, or that he was just a really knowledgeable rabbi, the best rabbi of rabbis?
See, this is the thing, and I think this is intentional, because the author is going to eventually give us Thomas, good old doubting Thomas, right? Because I told you, this is a late gospel. This is the late gospel. So the author is responding to the people, and the people wanted, especially the Greeks and the Romans, they want to know what else. We want to know what else. And so he's giving them the what else. And so part of this thing is, Jesus, I think, gives a great out to the Pharisees. So we could be like the Pharisees or the Gentiles. We're Gentiles, right? So the great out is that we are the other sheep, right, that we talked about in the man born blind. And likewise, the Pharisees said, does that mean we're blind? And Jesus said, yeah, you are. But then he gave them the out. Because in Jesus' own words, as long as you hear the phone, you hear my voice, right? You can still follow me, even if you don't see me. The other Gospels were written to people who in general had seen Jesus. Paul saw Jesus. Pauline letters are written to a lot of people who had seen Jesus. In the later letters and some of the other stuff, we start getting, the question, right, to Paul. When is Jesus coming again? Is it soon? Whatever, and Paul couldn't answer the question. And the church couldn't answer the question at the time, right? And Jesus hasn't come yet, which I think is great because it gives us all time to be one to Christ, right? What a great thing. We don't know when. These people were asking when, but the most important question to them was, if I don't see Jesus, can I still be convinced of Jesus? That's the whole point of the man born blind. That's the whole point of the Pharisees. Are we blind too? Yeah, you are. But your hope is you hear my voice. Where do you hear his voice? John is giving us the words of Christ and the actions of Christ. And not just that, but these miracles, which are beautiful miracles, right? Simeon. And they show Jesus. The fact that the pneumata, right? Pneumata caused him to snort like a wild horse and, to the depth of his spirit. And he's shaking in a Pharisaic, or a prophetic, kind of thing. Indicates to these people. And it's a direct point. And then it says Jesus wept. I think they're acknowledging him as a head rabbi, and then we have this. You notice it is 3 words and not just 2 words. It is the shortest verse in English. Jesus wept. I think there's a shorter one in Greek. Edekaisen, he shed quiet tears. Now the difference between this is Cariego, the other way of weeping and wailing, which was shown for the Judeans and for Mary, is cries, like wailing and crying like a crow, like a bird, right? And so you see Jesus, he wept quiet tears. You didn't know the Greek could be so, well, yeah, we did, right? We knew the Greek could be so concrete that we have specific words and word usage that shows us exactly what's happening. So it's not just Jesus weeping, not screaming and wailing, but that he wept quietly. It also is interesting because although I translated Jesus shed quiet tears, it says that the Jesus, because again, in Greek, Greek will use the direct, what am I looking for? The direct article, yeah, for names.
German too.
I'm into that. Jesus did not wail as Mary and Martha had, and the Jews said, see how he loved him. Whoa. Then the Jews, Jen said to the Jews, behold how he loved him. They made a large garment, certainly accordingly, the Judeans, you look and weigh at how, Ephiliai, he had loved him as a shield warrior. Oh man, I just, here's the translation. According to the Judeans, blind Judea made a large garment, you look how much he had loved him as a shield warrior. The importance of understanding this Greek and understanding what's going on here is, okay, although they may have made this statement, let's say Lazarus was just some rich dude, right? He's a rich dude. Well, let's say Lazarus was a poor man who made stuff. Like, maybe like Jesus was a craftsman, right? And made stuff. But the minute we called him that he loved him like a shield warrior, what does that tell you? Jesus has not even called his own disciples shield warriors. He said he loved them like shield warriors.
Brothers in arms.
That means he has got to be what to Jesus? A peer, a rabbi. Yeah. So this is why I say, okay, now we have what do you call it? We have tried to pick between the lines, and Jesus is, I think, the rabbi of Capernaum. Lazarus, the rabbi of Bethany. Whatever they are peers. And the reason you know that is because immediately when the Judeans saw this, the Judeans, the guys that call him Kyrie, right? They say, look, he loved him like a shield warrior. The other words they could have picked. The other words they could have said. But he loved him like a shield warrior, which means whatever they are peers. I think they're both they're rabbi peers. But they are peers. We know Jesus wasn't, we don't know what Jesus' wealth was. We know Lazarus apparently has a lot of wealth. We'll see that. We'll see that as it goes through. But someone said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? I told you, this is a continuation of the logos to tell us about the man born blind. How can you get any closer to it than this? And here's what it says. Let's see. Let's look at the King James, and then someone said, "Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died?" So many person object, but from out of them they said, "Epic." Wasn't a logical argument. In Inato, he would be powerful to him. The Anoax says, he having opened up the optimalis, the eyes, to raise a smoke, hence starting my smoke, the blind, to have made or done in order that, and hotos, he sheer it may not olace, he should die off. But some persons from out among them said he would not be powerful in order that he, having opened up the eyes of the raise of smoke, darken my smoke, the blind, to have done what he should, that he should not die off. Okay? And as I said, this is a reference to the man who was born blind and Jesus' healing of him. It's not as straightforward as our translation leads us to believe. The words in the Greek tell us they still doubted that Jesus had the power to heal the man born blind. They're scoffing at Jesus because he allowed Lazarus to die. This, if anything, yeah, do you have
Or just, I'm thinking back to the other resurrection type situation where the rich prince or whatever daughter was very ill and was about to die, and Jesus healed her remotely, and like maybe they know that story, and it's like, he did it for her, why couldn't he do it for him?
it could be.
Someone might have done that.
I think the main point, though, the author wants us to recognize this. Okay? And I told you before, I think old Lazarus was a Pharisee. I think he's a Pharisee. So he is automatically in that group of Pharisees that were following Jesus, right? That asked, are we blind too? And Jesus said, yeah, you are. But he who hears my voice. In a second here, we're going to have, if we get there, we're going to see where Jesus, where the blind man hears Jesus' voice. The Pharisee, the blind Pharisee hears Jesus' voice. This is a setup. This is all a logos, a proof text to Christ as God. And you see, remember, I reviewed with you the Luke thing, where, the rich man who was in hell said, can you send Lazarus back from the dead to tell my brothers so that they won't be stuck in hell like I am, right? And Jesus said, even if they saw someone come back from the dead, they wouldn't believe. You know, I think these are all tied together. It's a logos. It's a continuing logos. And all the hearers of this already know about the other Lazarus tales. They just don't know about this one. This is in here. Yes, ma'am.
I would also argue that even goes forward, because later when it says, like, the religious leaders were worried that with everyone seeing Jesus bring Lazarus back to life, that would not help their case, so they plotted to kill Lazarus. So again, literally, somebody did come back from the dead, but they were still completely spiritually blind.
Yeah. You know, doesn't that blow you away? I mean, yeah, you can see how people would be, what do you call it, mistrusting of some of the evidence, right? But here you have empirical evidence of, and I think direct historical evidence. I'm not afraid to say that I think all the Gospels and the letters in the New Testament are amazingly great history. I think they're absolute history. I don't think you can doubt them as history. And I think if you compare them to all other historical works from the time and place, that they are better history than any other history we have. I'm willing to put them up on that plane, and I think I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are. You know, again, you know, yes, we as Christians believe that they are inerrant, and we believe that they are God-breathed, right? But I think they hold their own historically. I think the big fight we need to do in the world is to get the rest of academia, right, to stop putting them in a pile over here and saying they're supernatural books and say, wait, we're going to judge them on the same plane that we judge other historical works, right? And we would win every day. That's why they won't do it, right? If they had to teach kids in the elementary schools, well, you know, the most historical document we have in antiquity is the New Testament. You know, I bet those people would be gagging, you know, like demon-possessed gagging, because their heads would be spinning around, because they would go, what? You know, but yet that's the truth. That's the truth. Yes, sir.
It probably doesn't matter anything, but when I read that, I also thought about them when Jesus was on the cross, saying he saved himself. Why couldn't he, or he saved others, why couldn't he save himself? That's kind of a similar statement here. He cured the blind man, why couldn't he save Lazarus?
Yeah.
Another connection between the rich man in hell and the Sanhedrin is that the rich man in hell, even though he's in hell, he's unrepentant.
Yeah.
He still wants Lazarus to be his gopher.
That's got to do too. Yeah, right.
When Martha first goes out to greet Jesus, and Jesus says, your brother will live again, and she comes back and says, well, I know he will live again at the resurrection.
Yes.
Which, wouldn't that be an indication that this is a Pharisaic household here?
Right.
So she's aware, she's talking resurrection.
Of the body.
It seems that's a pretty strong statement that Lazarus is also a Pharisee for sure, and whether he's a rabbi.
Yeah, if you remember when we were looking at that, I think last week even, that was one of my main proof points, right? That one of the reasons I said, I think that Lazarus was no kidding a Pharisee, because Martha gives Jesus the Pharisaic answer. Just like he said, you're right on the money. And that's when Jesus reproves her very gently, right? And then she makes the next statement, you are the Christ. Oh, man. What's really interesting about that, and again, I'll mention it back again, you notice she didn't say you're the Messiah. You're not the Messiah. Who said he was the Messiah? The woman at the well, Samaria. The Samaritan woman said, you are the Messiah and the Christus. Whoa. Where Martha says you are the Christus, she doesn't say you're the Messiah. Yes, sir.
Today in the sermon, Pastor equated Christ and Christus and Messiah as the same word.
Yes, they are.
So she did kind of say it.
Well, I mean,
Except it was
Just
more
different language.
Hellenized.
yeah, well, Christ is Greek and Hellenized, where Messiah is Hebrew. What really gets me, and should get you too, is the Samaritan woman said, you are the Messiah and you are the Christ, which, okay, I don't care if she's Samaritan, she got it 100% right. You see, she's tagging them together. Now, you could ask yourself the question, is the reason that the author didn't have her say Messiah to save paper? Could be. But you would have thought that in the mouth of a Pharisaic woman, right, that he would have said, John would have had her say Messiah, which shows that they're a whole lot more Hellenized than the
Judeans.
Well, the Samaritans, right?
I would suggest that the woman at the well was acknowledging that he was the Messiah for the Hebrew people, but also the Christus for all the Gentiles.
Well, I like that too, except the Samaritan woman would have never thought herself a Gentile.
Right.
But she uses both terms. Where Martha, who would
And
never
she's smarter
say that I'm a Greek, uses only one.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, maybe the author was saving space, but you know what? I think he would have saved space if he meant to project to us Martha as a really good Hebrew Pharisaic woman. She would have used the term Messiah, but instead she used the term Christus, which makes the audience, I'm telling you, the audience for this book, I think, are really Greeks and Romans. Yeah, there's Hebrews there too. They're in the congregation. But I think John was writing to the Greek and the Roman world. And all the Greeks go, yay, right? And all the Romans go, yay, because they understand this. And for him to put, and by the way, I think historically, Martha couldn't said this. I think she said exactly what this was recorded here. She said, you are the anointed one, not the Messiah, but the Christ, because she was Hellenized. But we get into this, okay. See, as I said this, the direct reference to man who was born blind and Jesus' healing of him. This is not as straightforward as our translation. See, the words Greek tell us, they still doubted. They're scoffing at him because, and they also believe, all right, obviously they don't, all right, we're jaundiced. We're totally jaundiced, okay? Because with Christ, a human being resurrected from the dead. And we have accounts, eyewitness accounts of Jesus raising people from the dead. We have a couple of Old Testament ones, which I think, they're not doubtful, but they are just interesting in themselves, especially with the language used. But in all the Greek world, did anybody come back from the dead? Nope. The only one that even came close was, what's his name, with his girlfriend?
Orpheus and Eurydice.
Eurydice, and she looked back.
Hades and Persephone, she had to keep going back.
She had to keep going back.
It was a cycle. Yeah, she couldn't totally come back.
Osiris still ain't back. They're still looking for his part. Okay, no one in the ancient world, no God, no human, no demigod ever came back from death.
They didn't have a word for it.
They did not have a word for it. Egerios, iknekros, and ageros, iknekros. In Greek, there's no word. It's always a statement. Latin later on invented a word, resurrection. There is no word in any language in the world until after Christ for resurrection. Period. Dot. This would seem to be a proof text to most of us, right? The fact that no myth cycle shows anyone coming back from the dead at all until after Christ. Now, after Christ, you suddenly begin to get all, the Mithrin myth cycle, a few other myth cycles, some of the Mysterions, suddenly you get people coming back from the dead. Where do you think those came from? From Christ, right? I mean, it's really interesting too, to me, and it's historical, right? The Mithrin religion was displaced by Christianity, especially in the legions. The legions had been worshiping Mithras who was God. Oh, I won't even. Go look at Mithrin stuff. It's really weird. It's a weird mysterion. It's not a happy mysterion. Their God is not a happy God. He basically did come back from death, but he was always missing his parts. It's not a happy story, the Mithrin mysterion. But yet, the Mithrin mysterion was overtaken by Christianity, especially in the legions. The legions had a real strong affinity for Christianity and just basically, absorbed it, and it took over. And we find a lot of the legions, worshiping Christ. You remember the 40 legionnaires, right? You remember that? They even had a song about it that was really popular in the Christian world about the legionnaires. It's a famous thing that happened supposedly in truth, that Hadrian, I think, one of the Greek Caesars said, everyone must sacrifice to Caesar. And so there were 40 legionnaires who would not sacrifice to Caesar, and they were out in the Urals. They were out in the cold region of Russia doing something. I don't know what they were doing. Anyway, supposedly they put them on an ice place in the middle, and instead of being willing to sacrifice, they all died. They all died of freezing to death rather than sacrifice to the emperor. And there are multiple stories of that in history with the Roman legions. So Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. We have time for a little bit here. Jesus, therefore, again, groaning himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus, certainly accordingly, anew, minos. He's snorting like an angry horse. Word it again. Into himself, coming or going to or into the sepulchral monument. It was but speleon, a cave, and lithos, a stone was resting upon, on or against it. Okay, certainly Jesus, snorting anew like an angry horse into himself, is coming into the sepulchral monument. But it was a cave, and a stone was resting upon against it. The reason this is important is, who is the author helping us with? What did he just do for our
Foreshadow.
Well, he foreshadowed, but what's he telling our audience? The audience is expecting a grave with a gravestone. What is it?
It's a cave with a stone in front.
Bingo. The reason he did that is because his audience doesn't know that a sepulchral monument to the Hebrews is a cave with a tombstone on it. So he's wasting paper to explain it to them. He doesn't. Do you need to explain this to the Hebrews? No. The only people you need to explain this to are the Greeks and the Romans, or the other cultures that are hearing this document. So that's why he's telling us this, to get us to tell us what's going on. Again,
It's really important to know that later.
It's very important to know that later. Yes, it is a foreshadowing to the future for the sepulchral monument that is going to be for Christ, right? So the author, as I said, he's fixing it for the audience. I think this is probably a good place to stop. I guess we can do this. And I want you to make sure that it refers back to pneuma, right? The snorting horse, right? It means that Jesus in his pneuma, his expression of the pneuma, wasn't just breathing hard. He's snorting. Now, you can take this any way you want. I don't think he was snorting in derision or snorting or whatever. I think it's just showing agitation. It's showing, the depth of his spirit. And it's also bringing to the forefront this idea of pneuma. Because remember, we had sarx in the semeion of the fish, of the feeding the 5,000. We had suke in the man born blind. Now we have a continuation of the man born blind, except it's Lazarus, and it's pneuma. You can't forget this pneuma. right? And this is the Greek worldview of human who a human is. Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray you look out this week. In your name we pray. Amen. Stop.